The sun hadn't yet cleared the horizon when Silas Morgan woke to the sound of nothing. No cattle lowing in the distance. No wind chimes his mother had hung 30 years ago. He'd sold those for scrap metal last winter. Just the creak of the house settling, like old bones trying to find a comfortable position to die in. He lay there on the bare mattress, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like Texas itself, and thought about his father. The old man would have gotten up by now, would have had coffee brewing, and been halfway through morning chores before the sun even thought about showing its face. But his father had been dead 3 years, and the cattle had been sold off 2 years ago, and now all Silas had left was this house, 40 acres of cracked earth, and a black quarter horse named Midnight. He pulled on his jeans, the same pair he'd worn for 4 days straight, and walked barefoot across floorboards that needed replacing. The kitchen still smelled like the beans he'd eaten for dinner, lunch, and breakfast yesterday. He filled the percolator with water from the tap that came out rust-colored for the first few seconds, added coffee grounds he'd been reusing for 3 days, and set it on the stove. While it heated, he looked out the window at his land. The Morgan Ranch. His great-grandfather had claimed it in 1889. His grandfather had expanded it to 200 acres. His father had held it through droughts and recessions and the agricultural collapse of the 80s. And Silas? Silas had managed to lose most of it in less than a decade. The bank had taken the first 120 acres 2 years ago. Harlan Cross, that vulture from West Texas Credit Union, had personally delivered the foreclosure notice, standing in this very kitchen with his expensive boots tracking mud across the floor like he owned the place. Which, legally speaking, he sort of did. Nothing personal, Morgan, Harlan had said, chewing tobacco and grinning like a coyote that had found a wounded rabbit. Just business. You know how it is. Silas had known exactly how it was. He'd seen it happen to the Hendersons, the Pratts, the whole goddamn county, one ranch at a time. Harlan would buy up the debt, foreclose, then flip the land to developers or corporate farms at triple the price. He wore a bolo tie with a turquoise stone the size of a walnut, and smelled like cheap cologne trying to cover up the scent of sweat and greed. The coffee finished brewing. Silas poured himself a cup in a mug that said, "World's Best Dad," a Father's Day gift from a life he'd never lived, and walked out to the barn. Midnight was waiting in his stall, a black shadow against the gray dawn. The horse nickered softly when Silas approached, and for a moment, the crushing weight on Silas's chest lifted. This horse was the last living thing his father had left him. They bought Midnight together at an auction in Amarillo, back when his father could still walk without wincing, back when the ranch still felt like something worth inheriting. "Morning, boy," Silas said, running his hand along Midnight's neck. The horse's coat was like warm velvet, muscles rippling beneath like water over stones. "Just you and me now." He fed Midnight the last of the hay. He'd have to figure out how to buy more by next week, and then let him out to the corral. The morning air was already hot, promising another scorching day. The drought had been going on for 14 months now. The creek that used to run through the property had dried to a trickle, then to scattered puddles, then to nothing but cracked mud and the bones of catfish. Silas decided to ride out and check the old riverbed anyway. Sometimes after a night when the temperature dropped, there'd be a little condensation collected in the deeper spots. It was a fool's errand, but it gave him something to do besides sit in the house and count the days until Harlan came back for the rest. He saddled Midnight and rode west, toward where the sun was starting to paint the sky in shades of rust and amber. The landscape looked like God had given up on it halfway through creation. Nothing but cracked earth, skeletal mesquite trees, and the occasional tumbleweed rolling past like a ghost looking for somewhere to haunt. The riverbed was about 2 miles from the house, cutting through a ravine where the land dropped away in layers of sediment that told the story of ancient floods. Silas guided Midnight down the steep path, loose stones skittering under the horse's hooves. That's when he saw it. At first, he thought it was a dead coyote, the way it was sprawled out against the rocks. But as he got closer, his heart started hammering in his chest. It was a motorcycle, a Ducati, by the look of it, one of those expensive Italian bikes that cost more than his entire year's income. It was lying on its side, one wheel still slowly spinning, steam hissing from somewhere in the engine. And next to it, crumpled like a discarded doll, was a woman. Silas was off Midnight before he'd consciously decided to dismount. He knelt beside her, his hands hovering over her body, afraid to touch her, afraid she was already dead. She was wearing a leather jacket that probably cost $1,000, jeans that looked like they'd been tailored, and boots that had never seen a day of actual work. Her face was pale beneath a layer of dust, a gash across her forehead bleeding slowly into her dark hair. But she was breathing. Shallow, ragged breaths that made a whistling sound in her chest. "Ma'am," Silas said, his voice rough from disuse. He rarely spoke these days, living alone out here. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyelids flickered but didn't open. Silas looked around, as if help might materialize out of the desert air. The nearest hospital was in town, 23 miles away. The nearest neighbor was the Kowalski place, 15 miles north, and old Bill Kowalski would probably shoot first and ask questions later if Silas came riding up with an unconscious woman. He could call an ambulance. Except he'd had his phone shut off 2 months ago when he couldn't pay the bill. His hands were shaking as he gently checked her for injuries. The head wound looked bad, but not catastrophic. Her left arm was bent at a wrong angle. Broken, probably. But she was alive, and that meant he had to do something. The decision crystallized in his mind with a clarity that surprised him. He couldn't leave her here, and he couldn't get her to town fast enough. The old ranch house had been tended to by his mother, a nurse, and there were still medical supplies in the bathroom cabinet. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. "I'm going to move you now," he said to the unconscious woman, even though she couldn't hear him. It seemed important to say it out loud. "Going to get you somewhere safe." He was as gentle as possible, lifting her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, all sharp angles and delicate bones. He draped her across Midnight's saddle, then mounted behind her, holding her steady against his chest. The horse shifted nervously, sensing the wrongness of the situation, but Silas murmured to him, and Midnight settled. The ride back to the ranch took twice as long as usual. Every jolt made Silas wince, imagining what it might be doing to her injuries. But she didn't wake, didn't cry out, just hung there limply, while Silas's arms cramped from holding her, and the sun climbed higher in a sky the color of bleached bone. When they finally reached the house, Silas half-carried, half-dragged her inside, and laid her on his own bed, the only bed in the house now that he'd sold off everything else. He stood there for a moment, looking at this stranger bleeding on his dead father's sheets, and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. But there was no time for second-guessing. He found the first aid kit his mother had assembled, along with a bottle of hydrogen peroxide that was probably older than the woman herself. He cleaned the head wound as best he could, butterflying it closed with strips of medical tape. The arm was harder. He didn't know how to set a broken bone, didn't have a proper splint. He ended up using the handle of an old broom and strips torn from a sheet, binding her forearm as straight as he could manage. By the time he finished, sweat was dripping off his nose and his hands were stained with her blood. She still hadn't woken up. Silas covered her with the thin blanket and then stood there, uncertain. Should he try to find out who she was? Her jacket pockets yielded nothing, no wallet, no ID, no phone. Either she'd lost them in the crash or she'd been traveling deliberately light. The question of why someone would be racing through the desert on an expensive motorcycle with no identification could wait. Right now, all that mattered was that she kept breathing. Silas pulled the chair from the kitchen and sat beside the bed, watching the rise and fall of her chest. Outside, Midnight was still saddled, still waiting by the porch. The coffee in the kitchen had gone cold. Somewhere in town, Harlan Cross was probably waking up in his air-conditioned house, planning his next foreclosure. But here, in this room that smelled like dust and old memories, Silas Morgan did the only thing he knew how to do. He kept watch. He waited. And he hoped that this one small act of decency might count for something in a world that had stopped counting his worth long ago. The woman's eyelids flickered again, and this time, they opened. The first thing Evelyn Sterling saw when she opened her eyes was a ceiling that looked like it hadn't been painted since Eisenhower was president. The second thing was a man sitting in a chair beside the bed, staring at her with eyes the color of creek water in winter, gray-blue and cold, but somehow not unkind. "Don't move too fast," the man said. His voice had the texture of gravel, like he'd spent years breathing in dust. "You took a pretty hard fall." Evelyn tried to sit up anyway, and immediately regretted it. Pain exploded through her left arm, and her head felt like someone was using it for timpani practice. She fell back against the pillow with a sound that was half gasp, half-sob. Told you, the man said. There wasn't any satisfaction in his tone, just a flat statement of fact. Where am I? Evelyn managed. Her mouth tasted like she'd been licking rust. Morgan Ranch. About 40 miles west of nowhere. He stood up, and she realized he was tall, maybe 6'2", built like someone who'd spent his whole life doing hard physical labor. He wore jeans held up by a belt with a tarnished buckle and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Everything about him looked weathered, worn down to the essential parts. Name's Silas Morgan. Found you in the riverbed with your bike. Evelyn's mind was racing, trying to piece together what had happened. She'd been running. That's what she'd been doing for the last 3 days. Running from New York, from her uncle's ultimatum, from the life that had been planned for her since birth. She'd bought the Ducati with cash in Phoenix, planning to disappear into the Southwest until she figured out what the hell to do with her life. My bike, she said. Is it? Totaled, most likely. Front forks bent, engine cracked. Even if it wasn't, you shouldn't be thinking about riding anywhere for a while. Silas walked to a dresser that had probably been handsome once, before decades of use had worn it down to bare wood. He picked up a glass of water and brought it to her. Arms broken. Head wound, needed cleaning. You should probably be in a hospital, but I figured you had your reasons for being out here alone. It was the way he said it. Casual, like he understood running from something without needing to know the details. That made Evelyn's defenses crack, just slightly. She took the water with her good hand and drank it down. It tasted faintly of minerals and rust, nothing like the filtered water she was used to, but it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. Thank you, she said. The words felt inadequate for what he'd done, but they were all she had. Silas just nodded and took the empty glass. I'll make you something to eat. Nothing fancy, beans and cornbread. Then you should rest some more. He turned to leave, but Evelyn stopped him. Wait. Why did you help me? You don't know who I am. I could be anyone. For a long moment, Silas stood there with his back to her, one hand on the doorframe. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet she had to strain to hear it. My father used to say that out here, all we got is each other. Everything else, money, pride, plans for tomorrow, it all blows away like dust eventually. But what you do for people when it counts, that stays. He left her then, and Evelyn lay back against the pillow, staring at the water-stained ceiling and thinking about her world. Her real world. The Sterling family estate in Connecticut. The board meetings in Manhattan. Her Uncle Arthur's face when she told him she wouldn't marry Marcus Ashford, wouldn't merge the Sterling and Ashford fortunes, wouldn't be the good little heiress anymore. You're being childish, Evelyn, Arthur had said, his voice dripping with contempt. Your father's will stipulated that you assume control of your shares at 30, but until then, I have authority over the estate. And I won't let you throw away our family's legacy because you're having some kind of quarter-life crisis. She'd walked out of that office, withdrawn $50,000 in cash from her personal account, and bought the first ticket to anywhere that wasn't New York. Phoenix had seemed sufficiently remote. The motorcycle had seemed like freedom. Now she was lying in a stranger's bed in a house that looked like it was held together by hope and habit, and somehow it felt more real than anything in her old life. She must have drifted off again, because the next thing she knew, Silas was back with a plate of food. The beans were plain but well-seasoned, and the cornbread was dense and slightly sweet. Evelyn ate with her good hand, suddenly ravenous. This is good, she said between bites. Really good. It's the same thing I've been eating for a month, Silas said. But there was the ghost of something that might have been a smile at the corner of his mouth. Evelyn wanted to ask him questions. Why he was living alone out here, why the house felt so empty, why he looked at her sometimes like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. But before she could formulate the words, she heard it. The sound of an engine. Multiple engines, actually, coming closer. Silas's entire body went rigid. He set down the plate he'd been holding and walked to the window, pulling aside a curtain that was more whole than fabric. What Evelyn saw in his face then made her stomach clench with fear. Not anger, exactly. Something colder. Something like resignation. Who is it, she asked. Trouble, Silas said. He was already moving toward the door. Stay in here. Don't come out no matter what you hear. But Evelyn had been given orders her entire life, and she'd just spent 3 days learning to disobey them. She got out of bed, ignoring the way the room tilted and spun, and followed Silas to the front of the house. Through the window, she could see a convoy of vehicles coming up the dirt road. A black pickup truck led the way, followed by a flatbed tow truck and another pickup. They weren't slowing down for the cattle guard. The lead truck simply crashed through it, sending the metal pipes flying. "Son of a bitch," Silas muttered. He grabbed something from beside the door, an old baseball bat, the wood stained dark with age and use. Then he stepped out onto the porch. Evelyn watched from the window as the trucks pulled up in a cloud of dust. 3 men got out of the lead vehicle. The one in front wore a bolo tie with a turquoise stone and a Stetson hat that was too new, too clean. His boots were expensive but covered in dust, like he'd been walking through other people's ruined dreams all day. "Silas Morgan," the man called out, his voice carrying that particular Texas drawl that could make contempt sound almost friendly. "How you doing today, son?" "Harlan." Silas's voice could have cut glass. "You're early. Foreclosure notice said I had until the end of the month." "Well, now about that." Harlan Cross. It had to be him. Pulled a piece of paper from his jacket pocket and waved it like a flag of surrender. Except Silas was the one surrendering. Judge expedited the order. "Seems like when you're 3 months behind on your debt payments and not making any effort to catch up, the court tends to move things along. So I'm here to collect what's owed." "I'll get you the money," Silas said. His knuckles were white around the bat. "Just need another month." Harlan laughed, and the 2 men with him, thick-necked brutes in work shirts, laughed with him. Silas. We've been through this dance before. You don't have the money. You don't have the cattle to sell. Hell, you barely have the house to sleep in. I'm doing you a favor here, putting you out of your misery." "This is my land," Silas said. Each word came out like he was spitting stones. "My family's land." "Was your family's land. Now it's property of West Texas Credit Union, which means it's my land until I flip it to the development company that's already made me a very generous offer." Harlan stepped closer, and Evelyn could see him more clearly now. He had the kind of face that might have been handsome if it wasn't twisted by smugness. "But you know what? I'm feeling generous today. I'll let you keep one thing. Can't let you keep the house. That's technically part of the land asset. But I'll let you choose one item of personal property." He let that hang in the air for a moment, savoring Silas's humiliation. "Choose wisely," Harlan said. Silas's jaw was working like he was chewing barbed wire. Evelyn could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. He didn't have much. That was clear from the state of the house, the empty barn. What did he have that was worth saving? "Midnight," Silas said finally. "The horse." Harlan's smile got wider. "The black quarter horse? That's a fine animal. Must be worth, what, 5,000? 6. He's not for sale. Everything's for sale, Morgan. That's the fundamental truth of capitalism." Harlan turned to his men. "Boys, load up everything else. Furniture, tools, farm equipment. All of it goes to auction. And bring a truck back tomorrow for the house demolition. Developer wants the land cleared by end of week." "You can't," Silas started. "I can, and I am. And if you try to stop me, I've got Sheriff Williams on speed dial. He owes me a favor. Several favors, actually." Harlan looked past Silas toward the house, and his eyes landed on the window where Evelyn was standing. His expression changed, became curious. "Well now, you got company, Silas? Didn't take you for the entertaining type." "She's none of your business," Silas said. "Everything on this property is my business, legally speaking." But Harlan didn't pursue it. Instead, he tipped his hat in a gesture of mock politeness. "You've got until sundown to get yourself and your lady friend off the premises. After that, you're trespassing." He climbed back into his truck, and his men started loading up the flatbed with what little Silas had left. A rusted tractor that probably hadn't run in years. A stack of fence posts. Some tools from the barn. But they didn't take midnight. When Silas went to the corral, the horse was still there, standing in the failing light, like a shadow of something that used to be beautiful. Evelyn came out onto the porch, steadying herself against the wall. Silas didn't look at her. He just stood there watching Harlan's convoy disappear down the road, dust rising in their wake like a blessing in reverse. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said. The words felt pathetic, useless. "Not your fault," Silas said. He was still holding the baseball bat, gripping it like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "This has been coming for a long time. Where will you go?" For the first time since she'd woken up in his bed, Silas looked directly at her. His eyes were empty, hollowed out by a kind of defeat that Evelyn, despite all her privilege and education, had never truly understood until that moment. "Doesn't matter," he said. "Long as I've got midnight, I'll figure something out. But even as he said it, both of them knew it was a lie. Out here, in this dry country where the land itself seemed to be dying, a man and a horse with nowhere to go were as good as ghosts. Inside the house, Evelyn's broken arm throbbed in time with her heartbeat, and she thought about making a phone call. Just one call. She had connections, resources, a last name that opened doors and intimidated judges. But she'd spent the last 3 days running from that name and everything it represented. Using it now would mean admitting defeat, would mean going back to a life she'd rejected. It would mean marrying Marcus Ashford and spending the rest of her life managing a fortune she'd never wanted. She looked at Silas, at the set of his shoulders and the way he held himself together through sheer will, and she made a decision. Not yet. Not unless there was no other choice. But as the sun set over the Morgan Ranch, over what used to be the Morgan Ranch, Evelyn Sterling had a feeling that choice was coming faster than either of them was ready for. The night Harlan Cross took everything, but midnight was the first time Evelyn Sterling had ever slept in a house with no electricity. Silas had explained it matter-of-factly, the way someone might mention it was going to rain. The power company had shut off service 4 months ago. He had a kerosene lamp and some candles his mother had made years ago, back when there was still a mother, still a family, still something resembling a future. Now they sat in the kitchen, the lamplight throwing shadows that danced like demons on the walls. Silas had made more beans. Apparently that was his entire repertoire, and they ate in silence. Evelyn had tried to start a conversation 3 times and given up 3 times. The man had the conversational skills of a fence post. "Tell me about the ranch," she said finally, determined to break through the wall of silence. "What was it like before?" Silas set down his fork and looked at her for a long moment, as if assessing whether she actually wanted to know or was just making noise to fill the quiet. Whatever he saw in her face must have satisfied him because he started talking. "My great-grandfather claimed this land in 1889. Came from Georgia with nothing but a rifle and a dream. Built the first house, just 1 room, over where the barn is now. He raised cattle and cotton, back when you could still grow cotton in this soil." He gestured toward the window, though in the darkness all Evelyn could see was their own reflections. "My grandfather expanded it to 200 acres. Added the 2nd story to the house, built the big barn, brought in windmills for the water. This was a working ranch then. We ran about 300 head of cattle, had our own brand and everything. The double M, Morgan's mark." There was something in his voice now, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Not quite nostalgia, too painful for that, but something close to it. "What happened?" Evelyn asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Lot of things. Drought, recession, cattle prices dropped and feed prices went up. My father took out loans to keep us afloat, and then more loans to pay back the first loans. It's like quicksand. The more you struggle, the deeper you sink." Silas stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. He worked himself to death trying to save this place. Literally. Heart attack in the north pasture. I found him next to the broken fence he was trying to repair. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said, and meant it. "Yeah." Silas turned back to face her, and in the lamplight his face looked carved from stone. "Me too. After he died, I tried to hold on. Sold off the cattle first, then the equipment, then parcels of land piece by piece. Kept thinking if I could just make it 1 more season, 1 more year, I could turn it around. But the math doesn't work. Never did." He sat back down and stared at his plate of half-eaten beans. "Harlan started circling about 2 years ago. Bought up the debt from the bank, which gave him the right to foreclose. He's been waiting, letting me bleed out slow. Enjoys it, I think. Breaking men like me." "Men like you?" Evelyn asked. "Stubborn. Stupid. Too proud to know when to quit." Evelyn wanted to argue with him, to tell him that holding on to something you loved wasn't stupid, that fighting for your family's legacy was noble. But she came from a world where legacy was measured in stock portfolios and real estate holdings, not in dirt and sweat and decades of breaking your back under the sun. What did she know about any of this? "Show me," she said instead. "Show me the ranch. What's left of it?" Silas looked at her like she'd suggested they fly to the moon. "It's dark. You've got a broken arm and a head injury, and there's nothing to see. Then show me nothing. I want to understand." He studied her for another long moment, then shrugged. "Your funeral." He grabbed the kerosene lamp and led her out into the night. The air had cooled to something almost comfortable, and the stars were so bright they looked like holes punched in the fabric of the sky. Evelyn had seen stars in the Hamptons and in Connecticut, but nothing like this. Out here, with no light pollution for miles, the Milky Way stretched overhead like a river of light. They walked to the barn first. It was bigger than it had looked from the house, a massive structure that must have been impressive once. Now it was just empty space and the smell of old hay. Their footsteps echoed on the wooden floor. "This is where we kept the horses," Silas said, pointing to the stalls. "We had 6 at the peak. My father loved horses. Said they had more sense than most people." He moved the lamp, and Evelyn could see names carved into the stall doors. Dusty, Ranger, Molly, Thunder, Shadow, and at the end, Midnight. "Midnight was the last one we bought," Silas said. "About 6 months before my father died. We went to an auction in Amarillo. Dad was already sick by then, wouldn't admit it, but I could tell. His color was wrong, and he got winded easy. But he insisted on going. Said he wanted one more good horse before he was done." Silas ran his hand along Midnight's stall door, tracing the letters of the name. "We saw this black quarter horse in the ring. 3 years old, beautiful bloodlines, trained but still green. The bidding went higher than we could afford, but Dad kept raising his paddle. I tried to stop him, but he just looked at me and said, 'Silas, sometimes you gotta spend money you don't have on something that matters.' We bought Midnight for $8,000. It was a fortune to us." "Where did you get the money?" Evelyn asked. "Took out another loan. Used the house as collateral." Silas laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's probably what finally did us in, that last loan. But Dad got 6 months with Midnight, and in those 6 months I never saw him happier. So I guess it was worth it." They moved on to the other buildings. The equipment shed, empty now except for some rusted chains and a broken plow. The old bunkhouse where ranch hands used to sleep. Silas's father had employed 3 full-time hands at one point, plus seasonal workers during Roundup. The smokehouse where they'd cured meat. The root cellar where his grandmother had stored preserves. All of it empty. All of it echoing with ghosts. "My mother died when I was 12, Silas said as they stood in front of the house again. "Cancer. Fast and mean. After that, it was just me and Dad. He taught me everything. How to rope, how to ride, how to read the weather and the land. How to be a man, I guess." He sat down on the porch steps, setting the lamp beside him. Evelyn sat next to him, careful of her broken arm. "He used to say that land remembers everything. Every drop of blood and sweat you put into it. Every animal born on it. Every crop you pull from it. He said as long as the land remembers you, you're not really gone." "Do you believe that?" Evelyn asked. Silas was quiet for a long time. Finally, he shook his head. "I don't know what I believe anymore. All I know is that tomorrow Harlan's coming back, and the day after that they're going to bulldoze this house my great-grandfather built with his own hands. And then it won't matter what the land remembers, because the land won't be mine anymore." They sat there in the darkness, the lamp flickering between them. Evelyn thought about her own family's history. The Sterling fortune built on railroad investments and steel mills, grown through careful marriages and calculated business deals. Her great-grandfather had been a robber baron, the kind of man who built an empire by crushing smaller men. Her grandfather had legitimized the money through philanthropy and political connections. Her father had managed the transition from old money to new, investing in technology and global markets. And what had she done? Run away, like a child. "I need to check on Midnight," Silas said, standing up. "You should go back inside. Get some rest." But Evelyn followed him to the corral where Midnight was waiting, a black shape against the starbright sky. The horse came to the fence when Silas approached, and Evelyn watched as this weathered, defeated man transformed into something gentler. "Hey there, boy," Silas murmured, running his hands over Midnight's neck and face. "How you doing tonight?" The horse leaned into the touch, and Silas rested his forehead against Midnight's nose. They stood like that for several minutes, man and horse, and Evelyn felt like she was witnessing something private, something sacred. "He saved my life once," Silas said without looking at her. "About a year after we bought him. I was checking fences out in the east pasture, and we ran into a flash flood. Water came out of nowhere. One minute the wash was dry. Next minute it was a river. Midnight got us to high ground. Wouldn't stop running even when I told him to. Smartest horse I've ever known." He pulled a brush from his back pocket and started grooming Midnight's coat. The rhythmic motion seemed to calm both of them. That's why I couldn't let Harlan take him. Midnight's not just an asset. He's family. Only family I've got left. Evelyn watched him work, saw the care in every stroke of the brush. She'd been around horses, had taken riding lessons at an expensive stable in Connecticut, had jumped in shows and won ribbons that meant nothing. But she'd never seen anyone care for a horse like this. Like every moment with the animal was precious. What will you do? She asked. After tomorrow? Silas kept brushing. I've got a cousin in Oklahoma. Works on an oil rig. Says he can get me a job. I'll have to sell Midnight. Can't take him with me, but maybe I can find him a good home. Someone who'll treat him right. You'd give him up? Don't have a choice. Can't exactly show up to an oil rig with a horse. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were dry but devastated. But I'll make sure he goes somewhere good. I owe him that much. Evelyn's throat felt tight. She wanted to say something, do something, but what? She was a stranger here, an intruder in someone else's tragedy. Her problems, her uncle's demands, her arranged marriage, her rebellion, felt absurd and trivial compared to what Silas was facing. They walked back to the house in silence. Silas gave her the bedroom again and made himself a bed on the floor in the living room using a blanket and his jacket as a pillow. Evelyn lay in the darkness, listening to the house creak and settle, and thought about everything she'd seen. This place was dying, but it had been loved once. It was still loved by a man who would rather break than bend, who measured his worth in promises kept and debts paid. A man who was about to lose everything except the horse he'd have to sell. And tomorrow, when Harlan Cross came back with his lawyers and his bulldozers and his contempt, what would Evelyn do? Keep hiding? Keep running? Or maybe, for the first time in her life, stand and fight for something that wasn't hers but mattered anyway? She fell asleep still trying to decide, and dreamed of horses running through water that had no end. Evelyn woke to the sound of an engine. For a moment, disoriented by the unfamiliar room and the pain in her arm, she thought it was just part of her dream. But then she heard Silas moving in the other room, his footsteps quick and heavy, and she knew. They'd come back early. She got out of bed as fast as her injuries allowed and found Silas standing at the window, his whole body rigid. Outside, 3 trucks were pulling up to the house. Not Harlan's black pickup this time. These were commercial vehicles. A flatbed hauler with West Texas livestock transport painted on the side. A cattle trailer. And behind them, like a funeral procession, Harlan's Escalade. They're here for Midnight, Silas said. His voice was flat, empty. Son of a bitch said I could keep him until sundown. It's not even noon. He was already moving toward the door when Evelyn grabbed his good arm, his only arm, the one that wasn't holding a rifle he'd pulled from somewhere. Don't, she said. Silas, don't. He's taking my horse. He's taking the last goddamn thing I have. And if you go out there with that gun, he'll have you arrested. Or worse. Evelyn stepped in front of him, forcing him to look at her. Please, let me talk to him. What are you going to say that'll make a difference? Evelyn didn't have an answer, but she took the rifle from his hands anyway and set it by the door. Then she walked out onto the porch. Harlan was already out of his Escalade, dressed in what he probably thought was ranch casual, designer jeans, a western shirt with pearl snaps, and those same expensive boots. The 2 men with him were different from yesterday's crew. These guys looked professional, wore uniforms with company logos. They were already unloading ramps from the trailer. Well, Harlan said when he saw Evelyn. The mysterious house guest. Feeling better, I hope? That was quite a nasty spill you took. So he'd recognized the Ducati. Of course he had. A man like Harlan made it his business to know things. You said Silas could keep the horse, Evelyn said, keeping her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. You gave him until sundown. I said he could choose one item. I never said when I'd collect the rest. Harlan smiled, and it reminded Evelyn of every boardroom shark she'd ever met. All teeth and no warmth. Besides, I'm doing him a favor. The longer he has that horse, the harder it'll be to let go. Like ripping off a bandage. Better to do it quick. That horse means everything to him. Means about $6,000 to me. Maybe 7 at auction. Good bloodlines, well trained. Some hobby rancher will snap him right up. Harlan pulled out a document from his jacket. This is the amended seizure order. Signed by Judge Morrison this morning. Everything on this property, including all livestock, is now property of West Texas Credit Union pending liquidation. He handed the paper to Evelyn. She scanned it quickly, Her father had made sure she could read legal documents before she could read Dr. Seuss, and saw that it was legitimate. Harlan had covered his bases. Behind her, she heard the screen door open. Silas came out, and one look at his face told Evelyn he'd heard everything. He looked like a man watching his own execution. "I'll need you to bring the horse out," Harlan said to Silas. "Or my men can go get him. But it'll be easier if you cooperate." For a long moment, Silas didn't move. Evelyn could see the calculation happening in his eyes. Could he fight this? Was there any point? She watched him arrive at the same conclusion she already had. The law was on Harlan's side. He'd won. "I'll get him," Silas said finally. His voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere far away. He walked to the corral, and Evelyn followed, helpless to do anything but witness. Midnight was waiting at the fence, and when he saw Silas, he nickered softly. Silas put his hand on the horse's neck and stood there for a moment, not moving, not speaking. Then he clipped a lead rope to Midnight's halter and started walking him toward the trailer. "That's right," Harlan called out. "Nice and easy." Halfway to the trailer, Midnight balked. The horse planted his feet and pulled against the rope, eyes rolling white. He knew. Somehow, he understood that something was wrong. "Come on, boy," Silas said, his voice breaking. "Don't make this harder." But Midnight wouldn't move. The horse was strong, over 1,000 pounds of muscle and fear, and even Silas couldn't force him. One of Harlan's men started walking over with a longer rope and a cattle prod. "Don't you dare," Silas said, and there was murder in his voice. "Don't you fucking dare use that thing on him." "Then get him loaded," Harlan said. He was enjoying this, Evelyn realized. This wasn't just about money. This was about power, about breaking someone who'd refused to break. Silas tried again, murmuring to Midnight in a voice too soft for Evelyn to hear. The horse calmed slightly, but still wouldn't approach the trailer. And why should he? He'd been born on this land, had spent his whole life here. The trailer meant leaving, and horses were smarter than people gave them credit for. "I can give you an incentive," Harlan said. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Yeah, it's me. Bring it in." A minute later, another truck pulled up. In the bed was a large metal cage, and inside the cage was a dog, a cattle dog, by the look of it, barking and snarling. Silas's face went white. "That's Duke," he said. "That's the Henderson's dog." "What the hell?" "Henderson Place went into foreclosure last month," Harlan explained casually. "Found this mutt chained up outside. Gonna take him to the pound, but then I thought, might be useful. See, horses are flight animals. They run from predators. So if you won't get your horse in that trailer willingly." He didn't have to finish the sentence. The threat was clear. Evelyn felt something inside her snap. She'd watched this man humiliate Silas, steal his land, and now threaten his horse with a terrified dog. And for what? Money he didn't need? The pleasure of cruelty? "How much?" she heard herself say. Everyone turned to look at her. "How much do you want for the horse?" Evelyn walked down the porch steps, her broken arm throbbing. "You said he's worth 6 or 7,000. I'll give you 10. Cash." Harlan's eyebrows went up. "You have $10,000 in cash." "I can get it. There's a bank in town, right? I'll withdraw it right now." "Evelyn," Silas said. "You don't have to." "How much for the dog, too?" she continued, ignoring him. "And for the equipment you took yesterday? The tractor, the fence posts, the tools? How much for all of it?" Harlan was studying her now, really looking at her for the first time. She could see him putting it together, the expensive leather jacket, the custom Ducati, the way she carried herself. This wasn't some drifter Silas had picked up. This was money. "The equipment's already been processed for auction," Harlan said slowly. "But I suppose I could pull it if the price was right. Let's say 30,000 for the lot. The horse, the dog, and the equipment." "Evelyn, no," Silas said. "That's insane. You can't." 40,000, Evelyn countered. "For everything. Plus you extend the foreclosure deadline on the house by 60 days. Harlan laughed. "You think you can buy back this ranch?" "Lady, I don't know who you are, but Silas Hero's $240,000. You got that kind of money burning a hole in your pocket?" Evelyn met his eyes and didn't blink. "Do we have a deal or not?" The silence stretched out. Harlan was calculating. She could see it. 40,000 cash right now, or wait for an auction that might bring less. And what was 2 months going to change anyway? Silas still wouldn't have the money. 60 days, Harlan said finally. "But the debt stands. And when he defaults again, and he will default, I take everything. No extensions, no negotiations." We clear. Crystal clear. I'll need that in writing. Of course you will. Harlan pulled out his phone again. My lawyer's on speed dial. He can draw up an agreement in 10 minutes. But I want to see the money first. Evelyn, Silas said again. He looked stricken, like she'd slapped him. You don't even know me. Why would you do this? She turned to face him, this proud, stubborn man who'd saved her life without expecting anything in return. Because someone told me that out here, all we've got is each other. Everything else blows away like dust. His own words reflected back at him. She saw the moment they hit home. I can't pay you back, he said quietly. I don't have anything. Then you'll owe me. We'll figure it out. She looked back at Harlan. Town bank opens in an hour. Get your lawyer working on that agreement. The ride into town in Harlan's Escalade was the most surreal experience of Evelyn's life. She sat in the back seat, her broken arm in its makeshift splint, while Harlan drove and made small talk like they were headed to brunch instead of a bank withdrawal that would drain a significant chunk of her emergency cash. So who are you really? Harlan asked. Some kind of wealthy do-gooder? Trust fund baby playing cowgirl. Evelyn didn't answer. The less he knew, the better. Doesn't matter, I suppose. Your money spends the same as anyone else's. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. But you're wasting it, you know. Silas Morgan is a dead man walking. He's been circling the drain for years. 2 more months won't change that. Maybe not, Evelyn said. But at least he'll have his horse. Harlan laughed. You bought him a horse in 2 months. You know what that makes you. An expensive delay. Nothing more. They reached the town. A cluster of buildings that looked like they'd been waiting to die for the last 30 years. The bank was a small brick building that probably doubled as a historical landmark. Evelyn went inside, showed her ID to a teller who looked like she'd been working there since the Roosevelt administration, and withdrew $40,000 from an account her father had set up for emergencies. Well, this qualified. By the time they got back to the ranch, Harlan's lawyer had emailed over the agreement. Evelyn read it carefully while Silas stood nearby, looking like he wanted to argue but didn't know where to start. The terms were clear, $40,000 in exchange for the return of seized equipment, the horse, and the dog, plus a 60-day extension on the foreclosure proceedings. The debt remained in full, and if payment wasn't made by February 12th, West Texas Credit Union had the right to seize all property without further notice. Evelyn signed it. Harlan signed it. Silas signed it, his hand shaking. Pleasure doing business with you folks, Harlan said, counting the cash. See you in 2 months. He left in his Escalade, and his men unloaded the equipment from the flatbed, the rusty tractor, the tools, even the fence posts. They released Duke from the cage, and the dog immediately ran to the porch and collapsed, exhausted and traumatized. And Midnight, still standing by the corral with Silas's hand on his neck, stayed exactly where he belonged. After the trucks were gone and the dust had settled, Silas finally spoke. Why? He asked. Evelyn looked at the ranch, at the house that was still standing, at the horse that was still here, and at the man who'd saved her life without asking for her name or her story. Because, she said simply, some things are worth fighting for, even if the fight was already lost. The first night after Evelyn had bought them time, Silas didn't sleep. He sat on the porch with Duke curled up at his feet. The dog had attached himself to Silas immediately, as if understanding that this man had saved him from the pound. Midnight stood in the corral, a black silhouette against the star-filled sky, and Silas watched him until dawn broke over the dry land. $40,000, 60 days, and a debt of $200,000 that might as well have been $2 million. Inside the house, Evelyn slept in his bed for the 3rd night in a row, her broken arm cradled against her chest. She hadn't told him where the money came from, hadn't explained who she really was or why she was running. And Silas hadn't asked, because asking meant owing even more than he already did, and his debt to this strange woman was already impossible to repay. When the sun was fully up, he made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, trying to think. He'd spent the last 3 years in survival mode, putting out fires one at a time, without ever addressing the larger conflagration. But now, with 2 months on the clock, he had to face facts. The ranch was 40 acres of drought-stricken land with no cattle, no crops, and no prospects. Even if he could find work, which was doubtful given his reputation in town as that Morgan kid who couldn't save his daddy's place, he couldn't earn $200,000 in 60 days. He couldn't earn it in 600 days. The only asset he had was midnight, and the horse was worth maybe 7,000. Nowhere near enough. He was still sitting there, staring at his cold coffee, when Evelyn emerged from the bedroom. She'd managed to put her hair in a ponytail with one hand, and she'd changed into the spare clothes he'd found for her, an old flannel shirt of his and jeans that were too big in the waist. She looked ridiculous and somehow beautiful at the same time. "Morning," she said. "Morning." She poured herself coffee and sat across from him. For a minute, they just sat there in silence, the way strangers do when they've accidentally become tangled up in each other's lives. "I need to leave today," Evelyn said finally. "I've been here 3 days. My uncle will have people looking for me by now." "Your uncle?" Silas repeated. It was the first personal detail she'd offered. "He's complicated. Family business. It's not important." But the way she said it suggested it was very important indeed. "Point is, I need to go. But before I do, we need to talk about what happens next." "What happens next is I default in 2 months and lose everything anyway," Silas said. "You bought me time, and I appreciate it, but time alone doesn't solve anything. So we find a solution." Evelyn leaned forward. "You said midnight is your only asset. How much could you get for him?" 7,000, maybe 8 if I found the right buyer. Still leaves me short by nearly 200,000. What about the land itself? Could you sell parcels? Harlan already owns the mineral rights. The land's value is tied to the full property. Can't sell it piecemeal. Silas rubbed his face. "I've been over this 1,000 times. There's no way out." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, thinking, what if you didn't pay it off? What if you renegotiated the debt? Harlan won't renegotiate. He wants this land for the development deal. Keeping me in debt is just the mechanism. Then we go around him. We find out who's buying the land and approach them directly. Silas looked at her like she'd suggested they build a rocket ship. "These are people with lawyers and connections. What am I going to do? Knock on their door and ask them nicely to back off?" "Why not?" Evelyn's eyes had a dangerous gleam in them. "You've got nothing to lose. I've got my dignity left. What little I haven't sold off already. Dignity doesn't feed you. Dignity doesn't keep the bank from taking your house." She stood up, pacing the small kitchen. "Look, I know I'm an outsider here. I know I don't understand this world. But where I come from, you don't win by playing nice. You win by finding leverage. And what leverage do I have? I don't know yet. But we won't find it sitting here waiting to die." There was something in her voice, a determination that reminded Silas of his father. The old man had always said that surrender was just another word for convenience, for when giving up seemed easier than fighting. And maybe that was what Silas had been doing these last few years, giving up one piece at a time until there was nothing left. "Where would we even start?" he asked. Evelyn pulled out her phone, the one she'd been keeping powered off for 3 days to avoid being tracked. "We start by finding out everything we can about Harlan Cross and his development deal. And I know exactly where to look." She made 3 phone calls in rapid succession, each one to a different number. Silas only heard her side of the conversations, but it was enough to understand that Evelyn Sterling wasn't just some rich girl on a motorcycle. She spoke with the casual authority of someone used to being obeyed, used to having resources at her disposal. When she hung up, she was smiling. Harlan's development deal is with a company called Argent Holdings. They're buying up drought-affected land across West Texas for a wind farm project. The deal isn't finalized yet. They're waiting on environmental impact surveys. And here's the interesting part. Harlan doesn't own the debt outright. He bought it from the bank, but he used leverage himself. He's got investors. How did you find all that out in 10 minutes? Friends in finance. They owe me favors. She didn't elaborate. Point is, if we can find out who Harlan's investors are, we might be able to pressure them to back off. Or at least buy you more time. And how do we do that? We go to Amarillo. There's a Cattlemen's Association meeting this weekend. Harlan will be there. He sponsors it every year as a PR move. We can do some reconnaissance, talk to people who know him, find his weak spots. Silas almost laughed. "I can't just show up at a cattlemen's meeting. Everyone knows I lost my ranch. I'd be a joke. Then you'll be a joke with information. Better than being a joke who gave up without trying." She had a point, though Silas hated to admit it. And the truth was, he had nowhere else to turn. His cousin's offer to work on an oil rig was still on the table, but that meant selling midnight, abandoning the ranch, accepting defeat. If there was even a slim chance of saving his family's land, didn't he owe it to his father's memory to try? All right, he said finally. We'll go to Amarillo. But first, I need to take care of the animals. And you need to see a doctor about that arm. It's fine. It's broken and splinted with a broom handle. You need a real doctor. They compromised. Silas would check on midnight, and Duke, while Evelyn made more calls. By noon, they were loading into Silas's truck, a 1987 Ford F-150 that burned oil and made a noise like a dying walrus every time he shifted gears. Evelyn looked at it with obvious skepticism. This thing's going to make it to Amarillo? She's never let me down yet, Silas said, patting the dashboard. Might not be pretty, but she's reliable. The drive to Amarillo took 3 hours through landscape that looked like God's rough draft. All dirt and scrub brush and the occasional windmill spinning lazily in the hot breeze. They stopped at a small clinic on the outskirts of town where a physician's assistant named Rosa took one look at Evelyn's arm and whistled. Who splinted this, your boyfriend? He's not my boyfriend, Evelyn said quickly. Uh-huh. Rosa cut away the makeshift splint and examined the brake. Well, whoever did it knew what they were doing. Clean brake, properly aligned. You're lucky. Could have been a lot worse. She put Evelyn in a proper cast, bright blue, because that was all they had, and gave her a prescription for pain medication that Evelyn paid for in cash. No insurance, no records. Silas was starting to wonder exactly what this woman was running from. They found a motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where the rooms cost $40 a night and the sheets were clean but thin. 2 rooms, side by side, because neither of them suggested sharing and both of them were too proud to acknowledge the tension that had been building between them. After they checked in, they drove to the convention center where the Cattlemen's Association meeting was being held. It was exactly what Silas expected. Rows of booths selling feed and equipment and veterinary supplies. Men in Wranglers and Stetsons talking about drought conditions and cattle prices. He recognized a few faces from before, when his father used to bring him to these meetings. Some nodded at him. Most looked away. There, Evelyn said, pointing across the hall. Harlan Cross stood near a booth advertising agricultural loans, surrounded by a small crowd of men who laughed at something he'd said. He wore a BOLO tie with a different stone this time, turquoise yesterday, jade today, and his boots looked freshly polished. When he saw Silas, his smile widened. Well, Harlan called out. Silas Morgan. Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd be busy spending your girlfriend's money. The men around him laughed, and Silas felt his face burn. But before he could respond, Evelyn stepped forward. Actually, we're here doing research, she said smoothly. For an article I'm writing about predatory lending practices in agricultural communities. You wouldn't happen to have a few minutes to talk, would you, Mr. Cross? On the record, of course. Harlan's smile faltered. An article? For the Times. Financial section. I'm particularly interested in how companies like yours target financially distressed ranchers. She pulled out her phone like she was about to record him. Unless you'd prefer not to comment? It was a bluff. Silas could tell from the slight tremor in her voice, but it was a good one. Harlan's eyes narrowed, and the men around him suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere. I don't have anything to say to the press, Harlan said. And for the record, West Texas Credit Union operates entirely within legal guidelines. If people can't pay their debts, that's their problem, not mine. I'm sure the bankruptcy court would agree. But what about your investors? Do they know about your creative accounting methods? Harlan stepped closer, and his voice dropped low enough that only they could hear. I don't know what game you're playing, little girl, but you're out of your depth. I've been doing this since before you were born. Then you should know better, Evelyn said, not backing down an inch. Silas Morgan gets his 60 days. And if you come near that ranch before the deadline, I'll make sure every newspaper in Texas knows exactly how you operate. For a long moment, Harlan stared at her, and Silas saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. Then he smiled, a cold, calculated smile that made Silas's skin crawl. Enjoy your 2 months, Harlan said. I'll see you in February. He walked away, and Silas let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Did you actually call the New York Times? He asked. God, no. I called my old roommate from college. She works in marketing. Evelyn was grinning, and despite everything, Silas found himself smiling too. But he doesn't know that. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking to people, piecing together information about Harlan's operation. What they learned wasn't encouraging. Harlan had foreclosed on 17 ranches in the last 5 years, all of them sold to Argent Holdings for the wind farm project. The environmental surveys were almost complete, and once they cleared, the development would move forward. But they also learned something else. Harlan had enemies. Plenty of them. Men who'd lost their land, who'd been humiliated at auctions, who'd watched their family legacies sold off piece by piece. And some of them were willing to talk. A rancher named Bill Kowalski, the same one Silas had been too afraid to approach for help, pulled him aside near closing time. "I heard what happened with your place," Bill said. He was 70-something, leather-faced and tobacco-stained. "Harlan got me 2 years ago. Took everything but my truck and my dignity, and I'm not sure about the dignity." "I'm sorry," Silas said. "Don't be sorry. Be smart." Bill handed him a business card. "There's a lawyer in El Paso, name of Sarah Chun. She's been building a case against Harlan. Class action lawsuit, fraud charges, the works. But she needs more plaintiffs, people willing to testify. You might want to give her a call." Silas took the card and read it. Chun Associates, attorneys at law. It felt like a lifeline, impossibly thin but there. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet. These things take time, and you've only got 2 months. But maybe it's worth a shot." Bill clapped him on the shoulder. "Your daddy was a good man, Silas. He wouldn't want you to give up without a fight." That night, in the motel room that smelled like cigarettes and cleaning products, Silas and Evelyn sat on opposite beds and counted their options. They had a lawyer's card. They had 2 months. They had 40 acres and a horse and a determination that felt fragile as glass. "We should call her," Evelyn said, holding up the business card. "This lawyer. See what she says. Even if she takes the case, it won't be resolved in 60 days. "No, but it might buy us more time. And time is all we've got." Silas looked at her. This woman who'd crashed into his life 3 days ago and turned everything upside down. She didn't have to be here. She didn't have to help. She had her own problems, her own life waiting for her somewhere else. But she was here anyway, fighting for a ranch that wasn't hers and a man she barely knew. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Really?" Evelyn was quiet for a long time. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the highway, its headlights briefly illuminating the room. "Because I spent my whole life being told what I couldn't do," she said finally. "What I couldn't choose. Who I had to marry, what I had to become. And when I finally tried to choose something for myself, I crashed a motorcycle in the middle of nowhere and woke up in a stranger's bed." She looked at him then, and her eyes were bright with something Silas couldn't quite name. "You saved my life. You didn't have to. You could have left me there, or called the police, or done what most people would do. But you didn't. You helped me because it was the right thing to do, even though it cost you time and resources you don't have. So maybe I'm helping you for the same reason. Because it's right. And because for the first time in my life, I get to choose what I fight for." Silas didn't know what to say to that. So instead of speaking, he reached out and took her hand, the one that wasn't in a cast, and held it. Just for a moment. In a cheap motel room in Amarillo, 2 people who'd lost everything they thought mattered found something else. Something smaller but stronger. Hope. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The cattle auction was scheduled for Saturday morning at 9. Silas woke at dawn in the motel room, unable to sleep, unable to stop his mind from racing through worst-case scenarios. He'd received a call the night before from a man named Dutch Henderson, no relation to the people who'd lost their dog, who claimed to have information about Midnight's bloodline that might increase the horse's value. It was a thin hope, but Silas had driven back to the ranch in the pre-dawn darkness to get Midnight, leaving Evelyn asleep in the motel. The plan was simple. Bring Midnight to the auction, see what Dutch had to say, and if the information was legitimate, maybe, just maybe, the horse would sell for enough to make a meaningful dent in the debt. Not enough to save the ranch, but enough to buy more time. The problem was that Harlan Cross had the same idea. Silas arrived at the Amarillo livestock auction facility to find Harlan's truck already parked out front. The flatbed trailer from days before was there too, along with 2 of Harlan's men. They were unloading a horse, a gorgeous Palomino mare with papers that probably cost more than Silas's entire life. "Silas," Harlan called out, all fake friendliness. "Brought your horse to auction after all. Smart thinking. Though I gotta say, might be tough to get a good price with competition like this." He gestured to the Palomino, and Silas felt his stomach sink. The auction was packed. Ranchers and breeders from 3 counties had shown up, and they were all looking at Harlan's horse like she was the crown jewel. Midnight, standing in his beat-up trailer, suddenly looked ordinary by comparison. "I heard you were coming," Harlan continued. "Thought I'd make it interesting. Nothing personal. Just want to make sure my investment gets protected." It took Silas a moment to understand what Harlan was saying. This wasn't a coincidence. Harlan had heard about Silas's plan to auction Midnight, and had deliberately brought his own horse to drive down the price. It was legal, barely, but it was cruel in a way that made Silas's blood boil. "You son of a bitch," Silas said quietly. Now, language." Harlan grinned. "This is just business, Morgan. You should understand that by now." The auction started at 9 sharp. Evelyn arrived halfway through the first lot, her arm in its blue cast, looking out of place among the crowd of working ranchers in her expensive leather jacket. When she saw Harlan's Palomino being led into the ring, her face went pale. "He's sabotaging us," she said. "Yeah." Silas watched the bidding start at 8,000 and climb rapidly. By the time the hammer fell, the Palomino had sold for 14,000, a record for the auction house. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer called out. "Next up we have a black quarter horse, for years old, good bloodlines. Starting bid at 3,000. Silas led Midnight into the ring, and the horse balked at the unfamiliar surroundings. The crowd murmured, and Silas could hear the judgment in their voices. Not as impressive as the last one. Older. Plain. 3,000, someone bid. An older man in the back. 3,500, came another voice. The bidding was sluggish. Silas stood in the ring, holding Midnight's lead rope, and felt the weight of 100 eyes on him. These people knew who he was. They knew he was the Morgan kid who'd lost his father's ranch, who was here because he had no other choice. He was standing in a public arena, selling the last thing his father had given him, and it wasn't even going to be enough. 4,000, someone called. 4,200, 4,500, and then Harlan's voice rang out from the buyer's section. $500. The crowd went silent. The auctioneer looked confused. "I'm sorry, sir. The current bid is 4,500. Did you mean? I meant $500. That's my bid." It was an insult. A deliberate, calculated insult. Harlan wasn't trying to buy Midnight. He was trying to humiliate Silas. To show everyone in this room that Silas Morgan's horse, his father's last gift, wasn't worth the feed it took to keep him alive. "Sir, that's well below the current bid," the auctioneer said. "We can't accept. The rules say any bid is valid as long as it's above the reserve price." "What's the reserve?" $1,000, but then my bid is valid. $500. Going once. Silas felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Around him, people were whispering, some laughing, some looking uncomfortable. Evelyn pushed through the crowd toward the ring, but she couldn't stop this. Nobody could. 6,000, a voice called out. Everyone turned. Dutch Henderson was standing in the buyer's section, a weather-beaten man in his 60s with kind eyes. "I bid $6,000 for that horse." 7. Harlan countered immediately. 8, Dutch said. 10. Harlan was smiling now, enjoying this. He didn't want the horse. He just wanted to make Silas watch as he drove the price up and then let it crash. 12,000, Dutch said, and there was steel in his voice. Harlan laughed. 12,500. The auctioneer was looking between them nervously. "Gentlemen, perhaps we should." 15,000, Dutch said. The crowd gasped. That was well above Midnight's market value. Harlan's smile faltered slightly, but he wasn't backing down. 20,000, Harlan said. And that's when Evelyn stepped into the ring. $50,000, she said clearly. "That's my bid." The auction hall went dead silent. Silas stared at her, his mind unable to process what she'd just done. $50,000 was insane. It was more than twice what Midnight was worth, more than anyone in their right mind would pay for a single horse. "Ma'am," the auctioneer said carefully. "Are you certain?" "I'm certain. 50,000, cash, and I'll pay it right now." Harlan was on his feet. "This is ridiculous. She's manipulating the auction. I demand." "You demand nothing," Evelyn said, turning to face him. "Unless you want to bid higher? Because I notice you've gone quiet, Mr. Cross. Cat got your tongue." Harlan's face was red. Around them, people were pulling out phones, recording this. The story would be all over the county by sunset. The mysterious woman who'd paid $50,000 for a ranch horse, while Harlan Cross sat there sputtering. Sold. the auctioneer said quickly, before anyone could object. To the lady in blue. $50,000 for lot 17. Evelyn walked out of the ring, and Silas followed her in a daze. When they were outside, away from the crowd, she turned to him. I'm sorry, she said. I know that wasn't the plan. But I couldn't let him do that to you. You just spent $50,000 on a horse worth $7. I spent $50,000 on your dignity. Which, for the record, is priceless. She was shaking, adrenaline probably, but her voice was steady. And before you argue, it's done. We'll figure out the rest later. Silas wanted to argue. Wanted to tell her she was insane, that she'd just made things worse, that now he owed her $90,000 instead of $40. But he couldn't speak, because standing there in the parking lot, watching this woman who'd crashed into his life less than a week ago defend him against a man who'd been tormenting him for years, Silas Morgan realized something. He was falling for her. Not because she had money, not because she'd saved midnight, but because she saw him, really saw him, as someone worth fighting for. And that was something no amount of money could buy. Inside the auction house, Harlan Cross watched through the window as Silas and Evelyn loaded midnight into the trailer. His phone rang, and he answered it without looking away. We have a problem, he said to whoever was on the other end. The Morgan situation is getting complicated. I need you to run a background check on a woman. Name's Evelyn, probably from out of state, driving a wrecked Ducati. I want to know who she is and why she's throwing money at a dead-end rancher. He listened for a moment, then smiled. No, don't wait. Do it now. Because if this girl thinks she can come into my territory and make me look like a fool, she's about to learn a very expensive lesson about how business works in West Texas. He hung up and walked back into the auction hall, already planning his next move. Because Harlan Cross didn't lose. Not to some cowboy who couldn't pay his bills, and certainly not to some rich girl playing hero. The game was just getting started. They drove back to the ranch in silence, midnight secured in the trailer behind them. Evelyn had insisted on coming along, and Silas hadn't had the energy to argue. His mind was still reeling from the auction, from watching Harlan try to destroy him in front of everyone he'd ever known, from Evelyn stepping into that ring like some kind of avenging angel. $90,000. She'd spent $90,000 on him in less than a week, and he still didn't know her last name. When they pulled into the ranch, the sun was setting, painting the dry land in shades of rust and gold. Duke came running from the porch, barking excitedly, and Midnight nickered from the trailer. For just a moment, it felt like home again. Silas unloaded Midnight while Evelyn sat on the porch steps, cradling her cast arm. When the horse was settled in the corral, Silas walked over and sat beside her. We need to talk, he said. I know. I can't pay you back. Not in any reasonable time frame. Hell, probably not in my lifetime. I know that too. So why? Silas turned to look at her. Why are you doing this? And don't tell me it's because it's the right thing to do. Nobody spends this kind of money on a stranger without a reason. Evelyn was quiet for a long time. In the distance, a coyote howled, and Duke's ears perked up. Finally, she spoke. My last name is Sterling, she said. Evelyn Sterling. And before you ask, yes, that's Sterling. The New York Sterlings. Railroad money, steel mills, corporate acquisitions. My great-grandfather was what they politely called a robber baron. My grandfather legitimized the fortune through philanthropy. My father, she paused. My father was supposed to teach me how to run the empire. Silas felt something cold settle in his stomach. Sterling. He'd heard that name before, seen it in the financial news his father used to read. They were billionaires. Old money. The kind of people who had buildings named after them. Your father, he said carefully. Past tense. He died 3 years ago. Heart attack. Left everything in a trust controlled by my Uncle Arthur until I turned 30. I'm 29 now, which means I've got one more year of being told how to live my life. Who to marry, what to become. Her voice was bitter. Arthur wants me to marry Marcus Ashford. Another old money family. The merger would make us one of the largest private fortunes in the country. But you don't want to marry him. I don't want to be a pawn. I don't want to spend my life in boardrooms and country clubs, managing wealth I didn't earn and don't care about. So I ran. Took cash, bought a motorcycle, and headed west. Thought maybe I could figure out who I actually am before I turn 30 and the trust kicks in. She looked at him then, and her eyes were full of something Silas had never seen before. Not pity, not guilt, something rawer. And then I crashed. And you saved me. And for the first time in my life, someone treated me like a person instead of a dollar sign. You didn't know who I was, didn't care about my last name. You just helped. Because it was right. Silas didn't know what to say. The gap between their worlds felt impossibly wide. He was a broke rancher counting pennies. She was a billionaire heiress running from an arranged marriage. What kind of story did they think they were living? The $90,000, Evelyn continued. That's nothing to me. I have access to millions through my personal accounts, money my father left me outside the trust. I could write a check for the full amount of your debt right now and not even notice it was gone. Then why haven't you? The question came out harsher than Silas intended. Because it wouldn't help. Don't you see? If I just paid off your debt, Harlan would find another way to take this place. Or you'd feel so obligated to me that it would poison everything between us. This ranch has to be saved on its own merits, or it's not really saved at all. She stood up and walked to the corral where Midnight was standing. The horse came to the fence, and she stroked his nose with her good hand. I'm not trying to buy you, Silas. And I'm not trying to be some kind of savior. I'm just trying to help someone who helped me. Is that so hard to understand? Silas joined her at the fence. In the fading light, Midnight looked like a shadow, beautiful and temporary. When I was a kid, Silas said, my father told me there were two kinds of people in the world. People who take and people who give. He said the takers always win in the short term, but the givers win forever because they build something that lasts. A reputation. A legacy. Trust. He put his hand on Midnight's neck, feeling the warmth of the horse's coat. I've been so focused on not being a taker that I forgot how to accept help when it's offered. My father would have been ashamed of me for that. I don't think he would have been ashamed of you at all, Evelyn said softly. I think he would have been proud that you kept fighting this long. They stood there as the sun finished setting and the stars began to appear. Somewhere in the house, Silas's phone was ringing, but he ignored it. Let the world wait. Let Harlan plot his next move. Let the debt keep piling up. Right now, in this moment, Silas had something more valuable than money. He had someone who saw him. Really saw him. The phone kept ringing. You should answer that, Evelyn said. Silas went inside and picked up the ancient landline. One of the few things he hadn't sold because nobody wanted a corded phone from 1995. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar. Mr. Morgan? This is Sarah Chun. I'm an attorney in El Paso. Bill Kowalski gave me your information. I understand you're having issues with West Texas Credit Union. Silas looked through the window at Evelyn, still standing by the corral with Midnight. Yeah, he said. You could say that. I'd like to meet with you. I'm building a class action lawsuit against Harlan Cross for fraudulent lending practices. If you're willing to testify, it could help your case. And a lot of other people's cases too. How long would a lawsuit take? Realistically? 2 years. Maybe 3. 2 years. He had 2 months. I don't think I can wait that long, Silas said. I understand. But Mr. Morgan, if you're willing to file a complaint and join the lawsuit, it might be grounds for an injunction against foreclosure proceedings. It's not guaranteed, but it's possible. And it would buy you time. Time. That word again. The most valuable commodity in the world. Send me the paperwork, Silas said. He hung up and walked back outside. Evelyn was sitting on the porch steps again, Duke's head in her lap. That was a lawyer, Silas said. She thinks we might be able to delay the foreclosure if I join a lawsuit against Harlan. That's good news. It's a delaying tactic. Even if it works, we still need $200,000. And we've got 60 days. Evelyn looked up at him, and in the starlight her face was pale and determined. Then we need to find another way. Harlan's vulnerable. We saw that today. He's got enemies. He's got investors who might not know everything he's doing. And he's got an ego the size of Texas. We can use that. How? I don't know yet. But I'm going to make some calls. People who owe me favors. Financial analysts who can dig into Argent Holdings and West Texas Credit Union. Maybe there's something in Harlan's business dealings that doesn't add up. Tax issues, fraud, something. Evelyn. Silas sat down beside her. You can't keep fixing my problems with your money and your connections. At some point, this becomes your fight instead of mine. Maybe I want it to be my fight. She met his eyes. Maybe I'm tired of running and ready to stand for something. Even if it's a 40-acre ranch in the middle of nowhere that probably isn't worth saving. It's worth saving, Silas said quietly. To me, at least. Then that's enough. They sat there in the darkness, and Silas felt the weight of everything unsaid between them. The class difference. The time limit. The impossibility of the situation. But also something else. Something that felt like the beginning of something worth fighting for. Inside the house, the phone rang again. This time, when Silas answered it, the voice on the other end made his blood run cold. Silas Morgan? This is Arthur Sterling. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Silas looked at Evelyn through the window. She was still sitting on the porch, unaware that her world was about to crash back in. I don't know what you're talking about, Silas said. Don't play dumb. My niece has been missing for 6 days. I have people tracking her phone, her credit cards, everything. The trail led to Amarillo, and the Amarillo trail led to you. So I'll ask again, where is Evelyn Sterling? Silas's grip tightened on the phone. She's an adult. If she doesn't want to be found, she's an heiress to a multi-billion-dollar fortune who's supposed to be managing crucial business operations. Instead, she's apparently playing cowgirl with a failed rancher who can't even keep his own property. Arthur's voice was cold, cutting. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to put Evelyn on the phone, and she's going to come home. Or I'm going to make your life even more difficult than it already is. Is that a threat? It's a promise. I can buy your debt from Harlan Cross with a single phone call. And unlike Harlan, I won't give you 60 days. I'll have you evicted by end of week. Silas felt rage building in his chest. This was Evelyn's uncle? This was the family she was running from? She's not a prisoner here, Silas said. If she wants to leave, she can leave. Then put her on the phone and let her tell me that herself. Silas walked to the door and looked at Evelyn. She was standing now, watching him through the screen. She must have heard his tone, seen the tension in his body. It's your uncle, Silas said. All the color drained from Evelyn's face. For a moment, she looked like she might run. But then her jaw set, and she walked inside and took the phone. Hello, Arthur. Whatever her uncle said made her close her eyes. Silas could only hear her side of the conversation. I'm fine. Yes, I'm safe. That's none of your business. No, I'm not coming back. Not yet. Because I have something I need to do here. I don't care about the Ashford merger. Arthur, listen to me. She stopped, listening. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Harder. You can't do that. That's blackmail. He's done nothing wrong. Another long pause. Evelyn's hand was shaking. Fine, she said finally. I'll make you a deal. Give me 30 days. If I can't resolve the situation here in 30 days, I'll come back and we'll discuss the merger. But you leave Silas and his ranch alone. You don't buy his debt. You don't interfere. You don't send your lawyers or your investigators. 30 days of complete radio silence. She listened to the response. Yes, I'm sure. I give you my word. Arthur, I've never broken a promise to you, and you know it. Fine. 30 days. She hung up and stood there, staring at the phone. What did he say? Silas asked. He agreed. 30 days, and he won't touch your ranch. But at the end of 30 days, if this isn't resolved, I have to go back to New York and marry Marcus Ashford. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Evelyn, don't. She held up her hand. I made my choice. Now we have 30 days instead of 60, which means we need to work faster. You can't sacrifice yourself for this place. For me. She looked at him then, and her eyes were fierce. Watch me. And in that moment, Silas Morgan understood what his father had meant about people who give. Because Evelyn Sterling had just wagered her entire future, her freedom, her choices, her life, on a 40-acre ranch and a man she'd known for less than a week. The question was, could they win? 24 hours after Evelyn made the deal with her uncle, everything changed. Silas was in the barn, fixing a broken stall door that he'd been meaning to repair for months, when he heard the vehicles. Not Harlan's truck this time, something else. Something that made Duke start barking frantically and Midnight pace nervously in his corral. He walked outside to see a convoy of 3 black SUVs rolling up the dirt road. Expensive vehicles, the kind that cost more than his entire house. They parked in a perfect line in front of the porch, and for a moment nothing happened. Then the doors opened. 6 people emerged. 4 of them were clearly security, men in dark suits wearing earpieces, moving with the controlled precision of ex-military. The 5th was a woman in her 40s carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Silas's truck. And the 6th was a man in his mid-50s, tall and distinguished, wearing a suit that looked like it had been tailored by someone who charged by the thread. He had Evelyn's eyes, the same steel-gray color, and the kind of bearing that suggested he'd never asked for anything in his life, because people simply gave it to him. Arthur Sterling had come to West Texas. Evelyn emerged from the house, and Silas saw her entire body go rigid. She'd been in the middle of making phone calls, trying to dig up information on Harlan's business dealings. Now she stood on the porch in borrowed clothes that were too big, her arm in a blue cast, facing down the man who controlled her future. "Arthur," she said. Her voice was carefully neutral. "Evelyn." Arthur looked around the property with the expression of someone examining a car accident. "I said I'd give you 30 days of radio silence. I said nothing about staying away entirely. You're interfering. I'm observing. There's a difference." He gestured to the ranch, the peeling paint, the rusted equipment, the general air of things falling apart. "This is what you've been hiding for. This is worth giving up your inheritance for. It's worth trying to save, yes." Arthur's eyes shifted to Silas, standing near the barn with a hammer still in his hand. The scrutiny was intense, clinical. Silas had the distinct impression he was being assessed and found lacking. "Mr. Morgan, I presume." Arthur Sterling, Evelyn's uncle and the current administrator of the Sterling Family Trust. He didn't offer to shake hands. "I'd like to speak with my niece privately, if you don't mind." "I do mind, actually," Silas said, walking closer. "This is my property. You want to talk to her, you do it here where I can hear." One of the security guards shifted slightly, and Silas saw the outline of a weapon under his jacket. But Arthur just smiled, a cold, calculating expression that reminded Silas of Harlan Cross. How refreshingly provincial. "Very well." He turned back to Evelyn. "I did some research after our phone call. I know about Mr. Morgan's financial situation. I know about Harlan Cross and West Texas Credit Union. And I know that you've spent $90,000 in less than a week trying to prop up a failing ranch that will be foreclosed on in." He checked his watch. 29 days and 14 hours. "I'm working on a solution." "Are you?" "Because from where I stand, you're playing hero in someone else's tragedy. And it's going to cost you everything." The woman with the briefcase stepped forward. "Miss Sterling, I'm Jennifer Ross, lead counsel for Sterling Family Holdings. Your uncle asked me to prepare some documents for your review." She handed Evelyn a folder. Silas watched as Evelyn opened it, her face going pale as she read. "What is this?" Evelyn asked. "An offer," Arthur said. "I'll purchase Mr. Morgan's debt from Harlan Cross. All of it, the 200,000 plus interest. And I'll forgive it entirely. Mr. Morgan keeps his ranch, his horse, everything. In exchange, you come home immediately and fulfill your obligations to the family." The silence that followed was deafening. Silas felt like the ground had dropped out from under him. $200,000 just gone? All he had to do was let Evelyn go back to a life she was running from? "That's not a deal," Evelyn said quietly. "That's extortion. It's a business transaction. I'm solving Mr. Morgan's problem and yours. You get to play hero, save his ranch, and then resume your actual life. He gets to keep his family's land. Everyone wins. Except I lose my freedom." "You never had freedom, Evelyn. You're a Sterling. You were born with responsibilities, whether you like them or not." Arthur's voice softened slightly. "Your father understood that. He built the empire we have because he accepted the burden of being a Sterling. He married your mother because it was good for the family, and they made it work. You can too." Evelyn was shaking now, whether from anger or fear, Silas couldn't tell. "My father was miserable. He worked himself to death because he couldn't escape the weight of your expectations. He built something that will last generations. That's worth a little personal sacrifice. It's worth my entire life. Don't pretend those are the same thing." Arthur sighed, like this was all very tedious. "I'm giving you a choice. Come home now, honor your commitments, and Mr. Morgan keeps his land. Or stay here for 29 more days playing cowgirl, watch his ranch get foreclosed anyway, and then come home having accomplished nothing except delaying the inevitable." He pulled out his phone and showed Evelyn something on the screen. "This is Harlan Cross's number. One phone call, and I can buy the debt. The paperwork is already prepared. All I need is your answer." Silas found his voice. "Don't," he said to Evelyn. "Don't do this for me." "Mr. Morgan," Arthur said, not even looking at him. "This doesn't concern you. Like hell it doesn't. You're trying to buy my ranch in exchange for her life. That makes it my business." Silas stepped between Arthur and Evelyn. "I don't want your money. I don't want to be the reason she loses her freedom. So you can take your offer and—" "Silas." Evelyn's voice cut through his anger. "Let me handle this. She stepped around him and faced her uncle directly. I appreciate the offer, Arthur. Really, it's very generous, in a horrifying, controlling way. But I'm going to decline. Arthur's expression didn't change. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. You promised me 30 days, and I'm holding you to it. No interference, no buyouts, no more surprise visits. You go back to New York, and you let me figure this out on my own. And when you fail, when the ranch gets foreclosed, and you come crawling back, then I'll deal with the consequences. But at least I'll have tried. Evelyn's voice was steady now, certain. My whole life, you've told me what I can't do, what I'm not capable of. Maybe you're right. Maybe I can't save this place. But I need to know for myself. For a long moment, Arthur just stared at her. Then he turned to Jennifer Ross. Draft an amendment to Miss Sterling's trust agreement. If she fails to return by the deadline or fails to honor her family obligations, her shares will be placed in permanent trust under family management until her 40th birthday. Arthur, Evelyn started. Those are my terms. You want your 30 days? Fine. But if you choose this ranch over your family, you'll spend the next 11 years with no access to Sterling capital, no voting rights on the board, nothing. Is that clear? Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. Crystal clear. Good. Arthur buttoned his suit jacket and headed toward his SUV. The security detail and the lawyer followed. I'll see you in 29 days, Evelyn. One way or another. The convoy pulled away, leaving clouds of dust in their wake. When they were gone, Evelyn sat down hard on the porch steps, her face in her hands. Silas sat beside her. You should have taken the deal. No. Evelyn. No. She looked at him, and her eyes were fierce despite the tears threatening to fall. You don't get it. If I'd taken that deal, I would have spent the rest of my life wondering if I could have done it. If I could have been more than just a Sterling. More than just a name and a trust fund. You could lose everything. I could, but at least I'll lose it on my own terms. She wiped her eyes with her good hand. Besides, we've still got 29 days. A lot can happen in 29 days. Like what? Evelyn pulled out her phone, the one she'd been keeping off to avoid being tracked. She turned it on for the first time in a week, and it immediately started buzzing with notifications. Like we call in every favor I have, she said. We dig up everything we can on Harlan Cross and Argent Holdings. We find their pressure points, and we make them an offer they can't refuse. This isn't a movie, Evelyn. We're not going to find some magic solution that makes everyone happy. Maybe not, but we're going to try. She stood up, pocketing her phone. That lawyer, Sarah Chun, she said she's building a lawsuit against Harlan. Let's call her back, see if there's something we can do to speed up the process. And I'm going to reach out to some journalists I know. Financial reporters who would love to do an expose on predatory lending practices in rural America. You're going to go after Harlan directly. I'm going to make him wish he'd never heard the name Sterling. Evelyn's smile was sharp, dangerous. Arthur was right about one thing. I am a Sterling. And Sterlings don't lose quietly. Silas looked at this woman who'd appeared in his life like a force of nature, who'd spent almost $100,000 defending him, who'd just wagered her entire inheritance on a broken-down ranch. And he realized something that both terrified and exhilarated him. He was in love with her. Not with her money. Not with what she could do for him. But with her, the fierce, stubborn, impossible woman who'd chosen him over an empire. Okay, he said. Let's do it. Let's take the fight to Harlan Cross. Evelyn grinned. Finally, I was wondering when you'd get on board. They spent the rest of the day making calls, sending emails, reaching out to everyone who might help. Evelyn contacted financial journalists at the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. Silas called Sarah Chun and agreed to be the lead plaintiff in her lawsuit. They compiled every piece of information they could find on Harlan's business dealings, looking for inconsistencies, looking for leverage. By midnight, they had something. Not much, but something. Harlan's development deal with Argent Holdings was contingent on environmental impact surveys that hadn't been completed yet, and the surveys were being conducted by a company that Harlan had a financial stake in. It might be a conflict of interest. It might be fraud. It was definitely worth investigating. This is good, Evelyn said, looking at the documents spread across the kitchen table. If we can prove Harlan manipulated the surveys to fast-track his development deal, it could invalidate the whole transaction, which means Argent Holdings might pull out, which means Harlan's left holding debt he can't monetize. And if Argent pulls out, Maybe they'd be interested in buying my land directly instead of waiting for foreclosure, Silas added. Cut Harlan out of the equation entirely. Exactly. Evelyn was practically glowing with excitement. We need to talk to Argent. Find out who's making decisions there. Make them an offer. We don't have anything to offer. We have time. We have information. And we have a ranch sitting on top of one of the windiest corridors in West Texas. Evelyn pulled up a map on her laptop. Look, your 40 acres is right in the path of the proposed wind farm. If Argent wants this project to work, they need your land, which gives us negotiating power. For the first time in years, Silas felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. They worked through the night, preparing a presentation for Argent Holdings. Numbers, surveys, projections, everything a corporation would need to see to take them seriously. When dawn broke, they were exhausted but ready. One more thing, Evelyn said as they were packing up the documents. I need to tell you something about Arthur's visit. What? When he showed me those papers, the ones about putting my shares in permanent trust if I don't go back. He wasn't bluffing. If I don't return in 29 days, or if I don't marry Marcus Ashford, I lose control of my inheritance until I'm 40. That's 11 years of having no say in my own life. Then you should go back, Silas said. Evelyn, this isn't worth. It is worth it. She took his hand. For the first time in my life, I'm fighting for something I chose. Not something I inherited or was obligated to. Something I chose. And even if we lose, that's worth more to me than all the Sterling money combined. Silas pulled her close, careful of her broken arm, and held her. Outside, midnight was waiting in the corral. Duke was sleeping on the porch. The ranch was still falling apart, the debt was still crushing them, and the deadline was still counting down. But for the first time since his father died, Silas Morgan felt like he wasn't alone. And sometimes that was enough. The meeting with Argent Holdings took 3 days to arrange. Evelyn used every connection she had, calling board members and executives until finally someone agreed to see them. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday morning in Dallas, which meant leaving the ranch, leaving midnight, and trusting that Harlan wouldn't make another move while they were gone. They drove to Dallas in Silas's truck, the presentation materials in a folder on Evelyn's lap. She'd rehearsed her pitch 100 times, but Silas could see the nervousness in the way she kept checking her phone, kept going over the numbers. What if they say no? She asked as they pulled into the parking garage of the Argent Holdings building, a glass tower that made Silas feel like he'd landed on another planet. Then we try something else, he said, though he had no idea what that something else might be. The meeting was in a conference room on the 40th floor with a view that stretched all the way to Fort Worth. 3 Argent executives sat across the table: David Chun, no relation to Sarah the lawyer, Rebecca Martinez, and James Whitmore. They listened politely as Evelyn presented their case. The ranch's strategic location, the wind surveys showing optimal conditions, the environmental complications with Harlan's surveys, the possibility of acquiring the land directly instead of through foreclosure, avoiding legal complications. When she finished, there was silence. Miss Sterling, David Chun said finally, we're aware of who you are. The Sterling name carries weight. But I have to ask, why are you personally invested in a 40-acre ranch in West Texas? This seems unusual for someone in your position. Evelyn didn't hesitate. Because this ranch represents something that's been lost in modern business. The idea that land has value beyond its price tag. Silas Morgan's family has been on this land for over 100 years. They've cared for it, worked it, bled for it. And I believe that kind of stewardship deserves to be preserved, not bulldozed for profit. Rebecca Martinez leaned forward. That's very poetic, Miss Sterling. But we're a corporation, not a historical preservation society. We need to know, can you deliver clear title to this property? Because right now, Harlan Cross holds the debt, which means he controls the foreclosure process. Why would we go around him? Because Harlan's environmental surveys are fraudulent, Evelyn said. She pulled out the documents they'd compiled. The company conducting the surveys, Western Environmental Solutions, is partially owned by Harlan through a shell corporation, which means he had a financial interest in the outcome. That's a conflict of interest that could invalidate your entire development deal. James Whitmore took the documents and read them carefully. These are serious allegations, which is why we're bringing them to you instead of the media. If you buy the Morgan debt from Harlan and acquire the land directly, you avoid the legal complications. You get clear title. And you don't have to deal with the PR nightmare when this conflict of interest goes public. It was a gamble. Evelyn was threatening them while simultaneously offering a solution. Silas held his breath. David Chun looked at his colleagues, then back at Evelyn. What are you asking for? $120,000, Evelyn said. That's enough to pay off the Morgan debt with room for operational costs to restart the ranch. In exchange, you get a 20-year lease on the western 20 acres for your wind turbines. Mr. Morgan keeps ownership of the land and the house. At the end of 20 years, the lease can be renegotiated. That's less than we'd pay through foreclosure, Rebecca noted. But it's faster, cleaner, and you avoid potential legal issues with Harlan surveys. Plus, you get a good press story. Corporation works with local rancher to preserve family land while developing clean energy. That's worth something in today's climate. Another long silence. Then David Chin smiled. I'll need to present this to our board, but I think we can work something out. Give us 48 hours. They left the meeting with nothing confirmed, but everything possible. As they drove back to the ranch, Evelyn's phone rang. It was Sarah Chun, the lawyer. Silas? I've got news. We filed the lawsuit this morning. Class action fraud against Harlan Cross and West Texas Credit Union. And we got a temporary injunction against foreclosure proceedings for all plaintiffs pending the outcome of the investigation. That includes you. Silas nearly drove off the road. You got an injunction? It's temporary. 90 days. But it means Harlan can't touch your ranch while the lawsuit proceeds. And if we can prove fraud, which I think we can, based on the documents you sent me, you might not owe that debt at all. When they pulled into the ranch, Duke came running and Midnight neighed from his corral. The house looked different somehow. Still run down, still barely holding together. But not dying anymore. Fighting. 2 days later, Argent Holdings called. They wanted to move forward. $120,000 for a 20-year wind turbine lease. Silas would keep the land, the house, everything. The contracts would be drawn up within the week. When Evelyn told him, Silas sat down hard on the porch steps. It was done. After 3 years of drowning, he could finally breathe. We did it, Evelyn said, sitting beside him. We actually did it. You did it, Silas corrected. I would have lost everything without you. We did it together. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Partners, remember? They sat there as the sun set, Duke at their feet, and Midnight grazing peacefully in his corral. The ranch was saved. The debt would be paid. Harlan Cross had lost. But there was still one problem. 27 days, Evelyn said quietly. That's all I have left before I have to go back. Silas took her hand. What if you didn't go back? Then I lose my inheritance. 11 years of Arthur controlling everything. Would that be so bad? Evelyn was quiet for a long time. I don't know. All my life, that money has been both a blessing and a curse. It's given me opportunities, but it's also trapped me. Made me think I was only valuable because of what I could inherit. You're valuable because of who you are, Silas said. Not what you own. She looked at him then, and in her eyes he saw something that made his heart ache. What if I stayed, she asked. Not forever. But what if I stayed to see what we could build here? We're partners in the ranch now, with the wind turbine lease. I could help you rebuild. We could make this place something again. What about Arthur? The trust. Let him have it. Let him manage the fortune and arrange marriages and play his corporate games. I'll have something better. She squeezed his hand. I'll have a choice. 3 weeks later, the contracts were signed. Argent Holdings paid the debt, not just to Harlan, but buying him out entirely. The lawsuit was still pending, but with the debt paid, it didn't matter. The ranch was free and clear. Harlan showed up one last time, driving up to the ranch in his black pickup truck. But this time, he didn't get out. He just sat there, staring at the house, at Silas and Evelyn standing on the porch. Then he drove away, and they never saw him again. Sarah Chun called with news. Harlan was under investigation for fraud. His business license had been suspended, and several of his investors were suing him for misrepresentation. It would take years to sort out, but he was done preying on desperate ranchers. And on the morning of the 30th day, the deadline Arthur had given Evelyn, she sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. Dear Arthur, I'm not coming back. Not to marry Marcus, not to sit on the board, not to play the role you've scripted for me. I'm staying in West Texas. I'm staying with Silas. And I'm staying because for the first time in my life, I'm building something that's mine. You can have the trust. You can manage the fortune. You can do whatever you want with the Sterling Empire. But you can't have me anymore. I hope someday you understand that some things are worth more than money. Like freedom. Like choosing your own life. Like loving someone who sees you for who you are, not what you're worth. Love. Evelyn. She mailed the letter, and then walked out to the corral where Silas was grooming Midnight. The horse had gained weight since she'd arrived, his coat gleaming in the sunlight. Duke was sprawled in the shade, tongue lolling. It's done, she said. Silas looked at her, and she saw the question in his eyes. No regrets. No regrets. He set down the brush and pulled her close, and they stood there in the West Texas sun, two people who'd lost everything and found each other. The ranch wasn't much, 40 acres and a house that needed work and a future that was uncertain. But it was theirs. 6 months later, they stood in the same spot and watched as the first wind turbine was erected on the western pasture. The lease payments had allowed Silas to buy cattle again, a small herd, just 20 head to start. Evelyn had used her remaining personal funds to repair the house and the barn. They'd gotten married in a quiet ceremony with just Bill Kowalski and Sarah Chun as witnesses. No family from New York had attended. Arthur had never responded to Evelyn's letter. But on their wedding night, as they lay in bed in the house that Silas's great-grandfather had built, Evelyn's phone rang. She almost didn't answer, but something made her look at the screen. It was a lawyer from the Sterling family firm. Not Jennifer Ross, someone else. Miss Sterling? I'm calling to inform you that Arthur Sterling has withdrawn his trust amendment. Your shares will revert to your full control when you turn 30, as originally stipulated in your father's will. Evelyn sat up, her heart pounding. What? What? He didn't say. But the paperwork was filed this morning. You're free, Miss Sterling. Or should I say, Mrs. Morgan. When she hung up, Silas was watching her. Everything okay? Arthur let me go, Evelyn said, still processing. He could have kept control for 11 years, but he didn't. He's giving me my inheritance back. Why would he do that? Evelyn thought about the uncle she'd known all her life. Cold, calculating, always putting family legacy first. But maybe he'd seen something in her letter. Maybe he'd understood that some things couldn't be controlled. Or maybe he'd just realized that a Sterling who chose her own path was stronger than one who was forced. I don't know, she said. But I think maybe he's proud of me. In his own terrible way. She lay back down, and Silas held her close. Outside, Midnight whinnied softly. Duke barked at something in the distance. The wind turbine's blades turned slowly against the stars. And in a house built on dust and hope, two people who'd saved each other drifted off to sleep, knowing that sometimes the best endings aren't the ones you plan for. They're the ones you fight for. They're the ones you choose.